topic, and we're only going to shed a little bit of light on it. Well, I say we, Nathan and Riyad, our two speakers today, will be doing most of the hard work. So firstly, thank you very much to them for joining us. Nathan Wrench, if you are happy to go first, I'm going to ask you to choose your top story from the list that's going to be showing up on the screen now, and whatever grabs your eye in neon flashing lights, why you think it's important, doesn't even have to be related to green tech. Nathan Wrench, Head of Sustainability Innovation at Cambridge Consultants. Over to you, please.
Hello, nice to be with you again, Michelle. So just before we joined the podcast, we were chatting about the last of these articles here in your Energy Transition Dialogues, the hydrogen concept car that Slovakia unveiled at the Expo 2020 in Dubai. It's a beautiful looking object. There's no question about the quality of the product design there. Speaking as a product designer, I was thrilled by the industrial styling of it. I do feel though that this is a complete white elephant. The idea of hydrogen as a fuel source for personal vehicles, it seems very strange to me. Even now, 2021, with the specifications for this racing car being described here, it fails to come up to the level of a 10-year-old Tesla. It's going to be more expensive. It uses a fuel source which is not widely available and is unlikely ever to be so in the domestic market. An expensive white elephant is what I think we're looking at here.
And we're certainly at risk of those white elephants in this energy transition. The car you've highlighted being, or potentially being, one of those. But we talk quite a lot about being distracted by the headlines, the digital, the ink headlines, the impressive figures and so on. And actually thinking, are we heading in the right direction? Are we focusing on the right things? There's so much noise, there's so much going on, which is fantastic. We need that to happen. But at the same time, we need to have a laser focus on making sure the right changes are made. Thank you very much, Nathan. Next, we have Riyad Bastani with us. He is the founder and general manager of ECO2 Square. Thank you very much. And Riyad, I think we all want to be where your background is as well.
Yeah, that would be nice. Thanks again, Michelle, for inviting me here. One of the topics I've seen in the list, which is becoming kind of, as you said, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of topics which usually come on the media, is the CCS technology, where Technip and Shell and oil and gas companies are trying to do more, probably because they're in the spotlight of everyone, because they know that they are one of the top producers of CO2 and having a big impact on GHG. So obviously they want to do things, and this solution technology, which is a carbon capture storage, and then you have the carbon capture usage, which is the other topic, which is not here. But if you focus on the storage, is something that is becoming in the hands of many. We've seen recently in Norway and Iceland have been, implementing industrial solution on a large scale solution to collect, with those big fans, the air, and then, CO2. And it's interesting because there's something we need to look into. Is it going to be like the solution in the future? Not sure. However, technology is progressing very quickly in this side. And when we see big companies like oil and gas companies putting money and investments into R&D for this kind of solution, there's definitely something which will go on in the future. So I believe it's the startup. It's like hydrogen. We have a lot of talks about hydrogen. So we are at the very, very beginning of it, like 10 years ago with solar energy. The challenges will come later on with once we store, okay, what do we do with it? How we transport it? Because it's, it's quite of a challenge, and you have to liquefy it and then put it in a different stage. And then you have to be close to an industry who can use it. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of talks about CCS in the coming years, I think so.
And for me, CCS, and we can talk about it more in the bulk of the conversation, perhaps, you'll both disagree with me, but for me, CCS is often spoken about in the same way that green hydrogen can be spoken about at scale, and as if it's already happening, or the market. Obviously, CCS is more developed than green hydrogen, of course, but it's spoken about as if we already have that level of scale. And then you start looking at the figures and how much progress still needs to be made and how many projects there actually are worldwide. The IEA has some great stats on it if any of the listeners are keen on exploring that further. And it is, as you say, at such an early stage, and it's not quite a white elephant, that risk, but it's a distraction in the sense the way these markets can be spoken about sometimes is as if they're far more developed than they are, and it gives the impression that the ball is rolling faster than it is. And to me, that's another big risk. But we can go into that shortly. So let's crack on rather with the main topic of the day. We've already touched on a lot: green tech, moving the needle. So just a quick overview before I dive in and ask you both some more questions about this. So we have more than 20% of the world's largest corporates with sales worth more than $14 trillion have now committed to net zero targets. This is according to the ECIU and Oxford Net Zero. And technologies, especially digital tools under the fourth industrial revolution, that umbrella, are pivotal to making these targets a reality. I think we can all agree that without more green tech, net zero won't happen. And huge progress has been made. We can even see on that list of top 10 stories the progress that is being made already in terms of creativity, scalability, and often in the same token, by default, affordability. And the growth rate of climate tech from 2013 to 2020 is grown by a ridiculous figure, really, of 3,750%. By what metric that is, I'm not sure, but it's a hell of a figure. And that's in just 7 years.
Yeah.
But there's a long way to go. As highlighted by key reports this year, we had the IEA, we had the IPCC, and most recently we've had the World Energy Outlook, putting a spotlight on some uncomfortable truths, and green energy technology is part of that conversation. So we've seen huge progress and huge momentum in the last 18 months. So that percentage rate should be higher, arguably. Nathan, do you think that's a fair assumption? What do you expect to see in 2022 in terms of momentum and progress?
What do I expect to see? Well, I do expect to see the momentum continue to build. Increasingly, firms are saying that climate risk is investment risk, and that you are not investable if you are not managing the energy transition. Realistically, I'm not sure that we're going to be working fast enough. It'll be fascinating to see what comes out of COP26 in a fortnight's time. Hopefully that will include some kind of commitment to carbon pricing on an international scale. If it doesn't, I'm not sure that we can really rely on individual governments to introduce policies which will change us in the right way.
No, absolutely. And from the oil and gas industry's point of view, what would you hope comes out of COP26 to help push that needle for green technology? Carbon pricing is one, so we'll take that off the list. But any others that you think are absolutely critical to be able to help push the oil and gas industry forward for next year?
Yeah, I think most of the oil and gas majors have now at least signed up to net zero targets. That they, I saw one suggestion though that what matters is the integral of their line, not the intercept. So it's not when they achieve net zero, it's the path they follow on the route to that target. So it's not enough to say we'll be net zero in 2060. If they have no 5-year plan. Yeah. No, that's right. So I think we have to accept that the oil and gas majors need to leave their product in the ground. I know we're talking about stranded assets. I know we're talking about financial uncertainty that comes with that. But they cannot afford to extract those products from beneath the ground. So they have to transition into other energy sources even before they've depleted their assets.
And Riyad, what is your take on this? Because Nathan just touched on the risk of stranded assets. We've seen some figures out there, $1 trillion. If governments are going to stick to their climate levels and their climate targets, we're looking at $1 trillion plus for the oil and gas industry. We're not even talking about just oil and gas industry in terms of stranded assets in the next couple of decades, which is a hell of a figure, especially over the last few years where we've had turbulent oil prices, we've had the pandemic, we've got the broader environmental agenda. Oil and gas companies are dealing with quite a bit right now, and then you have these sorts of figures circulating as well. peak oil demand as well. There's a lot going on. There's a big cliff for them to be climbing. Do you think that the fear of leaving assets in the ground, as Nathan's saying, do you think that that's strong enough to get them moving fast enough to invest in green tech, or do you think some are still at the mindset, well, we're not leaving it all in the ground, we'll invest in green tech as well, but there's no way that we're going to diverge from our plan as fast as we're being told to? What's your feel on that?
I think I agree with what Nathan said just before, and the trend is already there with the oil and gas companies. Just look at the recent announcement of big players like Total or Qatar. They changed their names, but it's not just about changing the names. Total became Total Energy. Qatar just recently announced they're changing to Qatar Petroleum to Qatar Energy. So it's not just about changing name, but they are also changing a roadmap. And they are really getting into developing technology which will help them. Like Total, for instance, solar energy, which they are working really on in underground in Saudi, for instance. There's a lot of project going on with Total and in the UAE too. So it's happening already. Is this going to be the big shift so that they can, in a few decades, get rid of the oil and gas pure assets? Let's see how things move in the coming decade, which I think will be critical. The next 10 years are going to be really showing the trend for the next 30 years for these kind of companies. Other companies like SABIC is also investing a lot in terms of, we are producing plastics, polymers, and they're developing partnership with a lot of European, German, and UK-based companies to recycle plastic for post-consumers and to try to, reduce their impact from the fossil fuel virgin, let's say, material, and reusing recycled plastic. So they are really investing a large amount of money already. So I think it's just the starting point of something which will become bigger and bigger, because there's a lot of pressure from the regulation. There's a lot of pressure from consumers, also from all parts. So it's happening already.
I think what's really interesting to me, because obviously it's happening already, was very, as you say, we're very much seeing it. I mean, everywhere. You can't read the news without it. Sometimes you can't even buy a product without being reminded that this progress is happening on the ground. But I've personally been told by somebody very senior in an oil and gas company that we're an oil and gas company. We will not be making any steps to invest in green technology. We are just going to keep chugging until essentially the market stops us chugging. Our pockets are deep enough that we can go forward. And Nathan's nodding, and so
doesn't surprise me too.
Yeah. And so I've been told this directly. That's what we do. We're not changing our spots. We're sticking to it. That's just the way it is. And I said, what about energy efficiency at a minimal level, improve energy efficiency and so on. And we'll look at it, but it's certainly not something it's certainly not something we're going to be allocating big petrodollars to. So there still seems to be this group or this niche that is staying quite stubborn, really, and is willing to let the profit slide over the next few decades, and it will happen as it happens, and isn't willing to adjust. But the majority certainly seem to be on board. Nathan, do you say that doesn't surprise you?
No, it's saddening, isn't it? When you look at one of the very few environmental measures that has actually succeeded, the Montreal Agreement that outlawed the use of CFCs, which were ozone depleting chemicals used in refrigeration, aerosol cans and the like. I mean, we're going back 30 years or so here, but there was very briefly a consumer-led campaign to try and persuade people to stop using aerosols and to choose the right kind of refrigerants in their fridges. Obviously, immediately doomed to failure. What worked was governments banding together and introducing changes to the regulations. And at the time, companies who were producing CFCs complained that they were being put out of business and there was going to be jobs lost. Refrigeration costs would go up, all sorts of things. Ultimately, that international mandate was formed, was pushed through, and was remarkably effective. That needs to be our model for the climate crisis. It has to be governments standing up to their donors and putting in place regulatory burdens on these people, because otherwise they're just going to follow the profits.
Indeed, and it's similar to carbon pricing, and that money very much talks. Riyad, this is a big question, so my apologies, and a broad answer is absolutely fine. But what would you say are the top technologies that will shape the energy transition in up to 2025? What really springs to mind for you? We've spoken about a couple.
Number one has to be electrification. So yeah, I know we started the conversation talking about hydrogen, which is I think largely a distraction. It's a fossil fuel bait and switch. People say, yeah, you've got to keep burning stuff, but it's carbon that's a problem, not combustion. I fundamentally don't agree with that. I think that if you can use electricity, you should, and you get so many knock-on benefits in terms of efficiency and controllability, that yes, switching from basic combustion into electric propulsion, heat, cool, whatever. I think then the whole area around the way in which we manage land and water in order to produce food, the way that we the way that we use land for transport, for residences, for forestry, and so on. These are areas that are going to need significant overhauls in the decades to come.
Indeed.
And I think probably then something like agrivoltaics is another one of those technologies which I think is worth watching. So the combination of solar energy, power generation, and food production of one sort or another is one of those growing areas that I'm going to be watching with some interest.
Okay, great. And just before we go on to our survey question, Riyad, what would be on your list? I mean, Nathan's mentioned a few there. What would you add to that?
I think something that very interesting that Nathan said about the agriculture. I remember 10 years ago we were talking about harvesting crops to produce biofuel. So which was not probably the best solution, because you are basically using land instead of human food to produce energy-based components. In this part of the world, because we're talking about the Gulf or the Middle East area, there's a lot of waste available in hand, because we consume a lot, we throw a lot, and it's not going in recycling today. So I think this is one of the major areas where I see a lot of things already happening. Using plastic, recycling it, and then as we mentioned before with SABIC, or turning it into through pyrolysis, through an oil that can be reused as an energy combustible. We have a lot of organics which can be turned into biochar or biocoal, and some companies are already developing projects here in the region. So I see the abundance of waste here is so much available that projects are meant to be developed in this part of the world, and it's already happening. I've been talking to many companies recently, and I had the pleasure to be a judge at the Gulf Sustainability Award, which happened in Dubai a few weeks ago. And I saw many companies, because we talked about the big ones, but we are talking also mid-sized company who have technology to provide and who have also facilities to manage. And there was like this one Jordan company was producing, I think, like tissues or hygienic products, and they were struggling with the facility because they had a problem of water, and just Nathan mentioned the problem with food and water. And to reduce their bill of electricity, they found a way to recycle the water and reuse it again, and reduce at the end overall the cost that they had. So finding solution based on the surroundings of the environment you're working in is definitely something which is growing and more in the region. And it's not only about big corporation, it's also about all those mid-sized companies who are getting into sustainability. And one last thing I wanted to add regarding the question before, which is our big corporations, some of them are not really having this on the agenda. I was attending an event recently with a big cargo transportation company, a German one, probably everybody knows. And they were investing in buying biofuel, which we know is much more expensive than normal fuel for the planes. But the guy was saying something very interesting, is that we know that today is going to be costly, but we are investing today to protect the future. And it's going to be about, putting the right seeds today, because tomorrow, whoever doesn't do it, and I think he's right, whoever doesn't engage into sustainability solutions and the technology is not going to be in the business.
Oh,
so no. I think this is something a lot of companies are realizing more and more as we move on with the agendas on different countries in the region.
Absolutely, and that's what Nathan was saying in terms of, climate equals strong investment. Being climate aware makes sense from a business point of view, which of course is that tipping point that so many of us have been waiting for quite a long time, and now it seems very much to be here. And the development of sustainable aviation fuels needs to pick up a lot, and it's another market that has been going quite slowly for a good decade or so, and now is beginning to pick up speed. The ideas are there, the templates are there, but it's that scalability and the affordability, and also the faith, and the faith to invest, as you're saying, this company, this gentleman who you're talking to, has, I'm sure we all agree, has the right idea. If you get a head start now, they get that first mover advantage, and something that's certainly not going to change. We are certainly heading towards net zero. It can't change for very obvious reasons that are beyond our control as well from a climate point of view, and you can get that competitive edge later on as well. Just bring up this survey question, please. And this is a little bit different to what we've been talking about, but I just really want to get your views on it with COP just around the corner. And we haven't really discussed how to help manage methane emissions, but I'd just be keen to get your ideas. So with potency 80 times greater than CO2 emissions, a global roadmap to start mitigating methane emissions from the energy sector must be decided at the COP26. So when we say global roadmap, we don't mean all the details and the chapters and so on, but the concept that yes, we absolutely need one, and that the sectors in the energy market, we'll just talk about energy for now, obviously it's not limited to energy, are committed to doing that. So just a quick yes or no, and then as soon as that's through, then Irene can share that with us. Riyad, what's your view on this?
Well, the emission issue we have today is, and you look at figures that have been published, is I think 75% is coming from CO2. Methane is probably a smaller range. Yes. So, we have to start with somewhere. So once we close the gap with the CO2 emission, then we can start tackling the methane emission, which come mostly from agriculture. And there's already things going on, we know, with the agricultural changes and the way we harvest crops, and then we manage all these environments. So I think we still have to focus on CO2 because that's the major chunk of it, of today's issues.
And that's interesting, actually, that point that you just made, because that very much feeds into that water, food, energy nexus again that we've touched on the sides of the water scarcity issue, which is one of the biggest risks, well, the biggest risk for the planet going forward, according to some index, and certainly a huge risk for the Middle East, and the importance of leveraging SMEs and the value that they can bring as well. And I think in the UK and the UAE, one of the figures, 94% either of the revenue that's generated or of the workforce, SMEs, they're hugely instrumental in the region. Nathan, what did you think to that question? I saw you thinking. What were you thinking?
Firstly, I was glad that you used the figure that the potency is 80 times greater than CO2, because obviously that you can pick one of a number of numbers for that potency argument. I think it's 80 times more potent over a 1 decade horizon. Is that right? Something like that, which I think is entirely accurate, because we have basically a decade to turn this ship around. If we start using figures for potency which are based on a decay over the course of a century, then that will ignore the effect of the policies that are being put in place today. I personally think that methane is a big problem. Riyad is correct that agriculture and land use changes, it dominates in this area, but there's also the very real problem of fugitive emissions from the natural gas industry. So fracking in order to produce it, the inadequate processes for flaring off in oil well captures, and even the hydrogen industry, because most of the time what we're talking about is grey hydrogen.
Yes.
And you don't get particularly good recovery in all parts of the world. And there are some standout performers. Obviously, I think Uniper down here, I believe that they've got good processes for minimizing fugitive emissions, but there are plenty of second-rate providers in that industry. So I think that methane needs to be taken very seriously.
Yeah, and what about you, Ed? Were you surprised by the results of that survey? Irene, if you could bring up the results again, that'd be brilliant, please. So 71% agree, 29% disagree. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised, because everyone is looking, at all the issues we are facing, and there's a lot of media, covering different topics. So people, whenever they feel there's something wrong, they want to do something about it. So obviously, methane is one of them, and people living in rural.
That we were talking about at the beginning, the noise, so much going on.
Yes. So, and rural people who are living in rural areas definitely are more impacted by these things than others in the urban areas. So I'm not surprised. But again, I think both of them are like huge topics to manage, and there's, we cannot do everything. So somehow we have to prioritize where's the big chunk of issues that we can tackle at one stage, and hopefully methane will come as a next step.
Do you think that there's a risk when we're talking about digital tools under the umbrella of the fourth industrial revolution, as we said at the beginning? Do you think that, because this certainly seemed to be the case earlier this year, where there were companies that were new to this space being told by consultants, being told by everybody, by the media, by everybody, you absolutely must be digitally aware, you must be digitally fluent. This is, it's critical to your business survival. Your staff need to be aware. So they were being really pummeled with the importance of digitalization and digitizing their content as well. And there was, very much came through that some were taking the wrong steps, because in the rush to do something, they innocently did the wrong thing, and then there's expensive backtracking, and they've it's cost them quite a lot. It's cost them time as well, and like Nathan's saying, we've got a decade to turn the ship around. We certainly don't have time to waste. Do you still see that, Riyad? Do you see companies perhaps taking the wrong steps when it comes to green digital technologies just because they're not really sure yet what to do, or do you think it's a lot more focused?
Digital, if we think about it also more globally as AI, also as a tool to help you improve your processes and improve in the industry, because that's mostly where I come from, and I have many examples where I've been dealing with companies trying to improve the way they process, for instance, waste with digital and an AI. There is a better way to segregate, for instance, waste, and compared to 10 years ago and today, there's a lot of new improvements and sensors and ways to segregate the right ways to go to the right industry, so that we improve all this. So I think digital is something mandatory, obviously, that we have to go through, and it's spreading very quickly, because it's about softwares, it's about tools that are available in different markets, and which are spreading a lot in the region. And how UAE is very keen in high-tech products.
Yes.
So that's also one area where I see becoming a good location for development of this kind of industry.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nathan, Riyad. We usually have 3 speakers. Obviously, there's only been 2 of you today, and I still feel like we could talk for the next hour and a half on this. There's so much. We'll have to wrap up, unfortunately, but we've cut, and hopefully you'll both be able to join us again, and we can go into more detail. I'd certainly like to go into more detail on that water, food, energy nexus, and the role that the energy industry can play and support it, because there's just so much. We've only really touched the tip there of what's happening. So thank you very much, Nathan. Thank you very much, Riyad, and we very much hope you can join us again soon as well.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.